Welcome to the Varsity Voices podcast, where we bring you the inside information on Chicago Catholic League football. Make sure you subscribe, follow, and like us on wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can also find us on X at varsity_voices1, Instagram at _varsity voices, and Facebook at the Varsity Voices Chicago Catholic League football, as well as on YouTube, where we're at the Varsity Voices. If you want to weigh in on anything at all, be sure to leave us a comment on where you're listening at, or email us at varsityvoices312@gmail.com. I'm Joe Frevaletti. I'm one of your hosts, and not with me tonight is your other host, Dan Frevaletti. He's otherwise engaged in something that actually makes him some money, and that's working. So we're going solo tonight with just me, but you will hear the wonderful baritones of Dan Frevaletti conducting the interview that we're going to be playing for you soon. Today we continue our preseason special episodes from the coach's office, and this time we had the chance to talk with head coach at St. Patrick's, Luke Mertens. He's a 19-year coach. He was an assistant at both St. Rita and St. Patrick's. He moved into head coaching jobs at the Lakes and Lake Zurich High School. As head coach, his teams won 6 conference championships. They earned 11 state playoff appearances and a state runner-up finish in 2017. His first year at St. Pat's, they went 5-6, made the playoffs. Last year, they had a tough season, going 2-8, but he's confident that was just a blip, and they will get back on track this year. He's another one of our head coaches who is an alum at where he is now coaching. I believe he was a 94 grad at St. Patrick's. And he provides some great insight in this interview about the St. Patrick's football program. So let's get right to it and get into the interview with head coach Luke Mertens.
Welcome to a special edition of the Varsity Voices from the coach's office. I am Dan Frevaletti, joined in the virtual studio with us today by Luke Mertens, head football coach of St. Patrick High School. Coach, how are you doing today? Thanks for being with us.
Great. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Sure. So you guys are in the midst of summer practice and summer schedule. How do you like the most recent summer schedule that's I guess kind of newish this year?
Well, it's funny. We talk about this a lot as a football staff, and having done this for 25 years, I definitely have kind of come around in my thought process of summer. To be honest with you, I'm probably an outlier in this, but I think we'd better serve the Illinois high school football community by going to some type of spring ball, and then summer becomes really just lifting and running. And then you start the fall season. There's a multitude of reasons why I believe that.
Yeah.
Right now, the way it's set up, we're allowed the contact days, so of course we're going to use them. Mm-hmm. But I also think it's very difficult to expect the level of intensity that you need to perform at this sport from June all the way through Thanksgiving, which is what we're all gunning for. On top of that, we're fighting AAU basketball, travel baseball, summer jobs. So it gets kind of exhausting, to be honest with you. But as of right now, we have the days. We have to use them to have a chance to be competitive. But long term, I really hope that we go to some type of spring ball and make summer more like the off season.
Yeah, it's funny you say you think you're an outlier. I haven't heard the spring ball thing. I've talked to some coaches and people in Florida and in the South that do a spring ball and then nothing in the summer. So I know that's out there, but with other coaches wanting to do something different in the summer, or maybe going back to go forward, so to speak, you're not as much of an outlier as you think. And I was one coaching that I was like, hey, let's lift and run. Let's do a lot of that in the summer. Where do you spend your time in these days? I mean, do you try and do a 50-50 balance? Is it more time on the field, or do where do you like to divide your time with the team?
I'm constantly just tweaking it and just trying to figure out a way, because this profession, I mean, it is so difficult to find coaches more than ever. And every year we're all facing the same struggles. And part of it is because of the demands of the sport, to take from the famous phrase of Nick Saban, it takes what it takes, right? But the reality is it really pulls people away from their families and the jobs that really put food on the table. So it's a really difficult balance, on top of the fact that there's just so much to do. So it's hard to be competitive if I said, well, you know what, we're going to just focus on the strength portion and not worry about the field portion, because we'll get left behind. I mean, there's just no way to do it. So it's each year we sit down as a staff and just try to figure out like what is really the balance, I mean, to expect our kids to play at the level we want from June all the way, like I said, ideally through Thanksgiving, I think is unrealistic. But it's also unrealistic for us to even have a chance at November football if we're not on the field in June and July. So, I guess I would say right now, ideally, we're probably a 50-50 split is the best way I could say it. But again, I hope we figure it out, because, the bigger thing too, and I sorry to get on my soapbox, but it just drives me a little nuts. Like, you look at spring recruiting, which is so crucial, and it's harder than ever to get recruited with transfer portals and everything else going on right now. Like, we do our athletes such a disservice, because if we're in Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, Texas, like, these college coaches come in March and they get to watch kids play football. In Illinois, they get to come in and watch them squat. Like, yeah, that's great, but again, we're really just doing a little bit of a disservice to our kids there.
Yeah, no, I completely get it, and I know for a fact that you're not alone in this at all. And I always felt like, or I would imagine, it's really challenging to keep kids motivated, like you said, from June to November. But in June, when they've got all the distractions you mentioned, plus there's no game to practice for. There's nothing for 25 days where you have point to. And football is such I get that you get on that Friday rhythm when there's no game to prepare for. It's a struggle to keep kids motivated for that long.
Well, on top of that, you look at what everyone's fighting for athletes right now, because it's easier than ever to sit inside the air conditioning and play video games. So we're all fighting for kids. Right. Plus, there's this fight. There's this idea if you specialize, you have a better shot to go D1, which is a completely false narrative.
Right.
But anyway, you look at what happens, and I guarantee if you talk to coaches anywhere, it doesn't matter from the top in our state to the guys that don't win a lot of games in our state. Like, it is so frustrating, because the kids will always put football second because they have a travel baseball tournament or they have an AAU basketball tournament, because what do we have to offer? Hey, put on 15 pounds of equipment and run around in 90-degree heat for 2.5 hours, or go play a basketball game in an air-conditioned, basketball court. Like, obviously, you can't fault the kids in that situation, right? And They've been sold on the idea that they have to do this basketball tournament, they have to do this baseball showcase, because that's what to give them the opportunity of a scholarship, which is what they're also pursuing. So they're going, why would I go to football practice when I have to maybe go get looked at in basketball or baseball? And now you got lacrosse tournaments popping up. Like, it's absolutely exhausting, to be honest with you.
Yeah, they're trying to fill a 10-pound bag with 20 pounds of stuff from June to August. So, well, I certainly appreciate it and agree with you on a lot of those points. But you are moving out a little bit. So you have been back at your alma mater for a few years now. I think you're going into year 4, maybe. What's it mean to you? I've asked all the coaches who are alums and coaching at this school. What's it mean for you to coach at St. Patrick?
Yeah, so I'm going into year 3, which is hard to believe that's happening already. Yeah, I mean, it's really it's hard to describe it, to be honest with you. I stepped away from coaching. I was I was very disenchanted with many things, a lot of what we just been discussing with the summer.
Sure.
We're in this business because we're very passionate about, one, helping people become the best versions of themselves, and two, we want to win. We're competitive people. And I felt like there was a lot of things out of my control preventing me from getting to where I wanted to be. And it just reached a point where I was like, why am I neglecting my own family and I'm coming home grumpy all the time? Like I had to kind of press pause right when the pandemic hit, because there's no way I want to do anything remotely because I'm a people person.
Yeah.
So one of my former players, Dan Santucci, ends up becoming the president of St. Patrick High School. I coached him back in the day at St. Pat's, and he cold called me and said, "Hey, come back home, be our head football coach. We're trying to bring a bunch of old Shamrocks back." And I'm gonna be honest with you, like, it was never even on my radar. I mean, I thought I was done with coaching. I thought I was done with education. And I never thought I'd be going back to St. Pat's, because most people, I started in the Catholic sector and then I went to the public sector, which is the normal route to go. Very few people go Catholic, public, back to Catholic. I was definitely, going against the system there. But I hung up with Dan and I came in, I talked to my wife, and, she's like, "Hey, like, maybe this is a sign." And, I've told this story before, but I lost one of my best friends. He was my offensive line coach. He passed away from a heart attack, went to sleep, never woke up. Well, how this all ties in is he told me that one of his goals, he always heard about the Catholic League, St. Pat's, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, "Hey, man, we got to go back to St. Pat's. I want to be your line coach. I want to see what it's like to coach in that great league." Well, he suddenly passes away. I was asked to eulogize him, which was one of the hardest things I ever did.
I'm sure.
And literally within the same week, Dan Santucci calls me out of nowhere and says, "We want you to be the head football coach at St. Pat's." And again, talking to my wife, she goes, "This is a sign from Cristo. Like, you're meant to do this." So it kind of all tied back together. And, when I walked in through those doors and, saw the school, smelt the school, like all the things I remember, I'm like, this was just one of those divine interventions that was meant to be.
Yeah, the stars aligned, divine intervention. Yeah, that's a great story. Sad, but it's great that it got you back to what you're passionate about. We've talked a little bit about coaching and maybe how it's changed over the last several years. Do you coach a position or on either side of the ball, or do you more oversee?
I do coach a position. To be honest with you, I probably do way too much, and I'm way too much of a micromanager. It's something that every year I say I want to work on, and then every year I end up just not following through with it. And part of it is just because I have this obsession of how I want things to be done. Mm-hmm. And, like I tell my own players, like, the hardest standards to live to should be your own, so I'm not saying my way is the right way and my assistants are wrong. I'm not saying that at all. I just know that there's a certain particular way I like to do things. It drives my wife and kids crazy at home as well. I wish I wasn't that way. I wish I was more free-spirited and could just let things go. So because of that, I tend to micromanage. So I do coach a position. I do probably have my hands in too many things. But it also is what allows me still to feel like a football coach rather than a CEO as well.
Sure. Okay. Well, moving on the field a little bit, when I do this and prepare to talk to coaches, I kind of look at the players who were there last year and look at some of the awards lists and that sort of thing. So St. Pat's is the one school in the conference that had all seniors on the all-conference team. So I don't know if that's a scary proposition. I'm sure you're excited about the guys who are there to step up this year, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of the players who are kind of going to fill those roles and be your leaders on the field this year.
Yeah, so we had a great senior class last year. I mean, they were just great kids. When I came in, it's a rebuild. Like there's a lot that has to be done, and like most businesses, most programs in any sport, like unless you're actually on the inside, you have no idea what really needs to be fixed. So from the outside, because, things are great here. And then you get in the inside, the inner working, it's like, man, there's a lot of things to fix. So we have actually been very young, to be totally honest with you. Mm-hmm. Last year, we only had 14 seniors. And that's a dangerous way to live in this conference. I mean, it's really hard, right? So those 14 seniors played their butts off. There's nothing more I could have asked for them. But like I told them, if I had 28 of them as opposed to 14, our season probably looks a lot differently,
Sure.
So we definitely lost a lot of talent, but I mean, we've been playing young guys for a long time. I mean, 3 of our offensive linemen have been starting on the O-line since their freshman year. So now they're going into their junior year. So they are a third-year varsity offensive line starter in arguably the best conference in the state, and they're still only going to be a junior. So we obviously have taken our lumps there. It's the most important position on the field. So hopefully now we start to kind of catch up a little bit. We've kind of had this ongoing joke that we're the only team in the conference where our offensive line still gets dropped off to practice from their mom and their dad. Like they finally got their driver's license this year. So hoping we could see that. So, and those 3 linemen, Eli Valencia, Connor Malinak, and Matt Downs are going to be juniors, and they'll be big pieces to our puzzle. We also have another kid, Kevin Michelson, that's also been playing varsity football since his freshman year. That's also going to be a junior. He plays on the defensive line. On top of that, we have multiple kids that are going to be juniors. Joey Pemberton, Thomas White, Anthony Catrone, Nick Ergish. These are guys that their freshman, sophomore year have been logging varsity minutes against some of the best competition you could play, and now they're all going to be juniors. And that was like the first group that came in with me. So we're really hoping that group can now actually play varsity level football, because as a freshman and sophomore, unless you're just absolute freak of nature, it's pretty tough to compete in this conference. So those are some of the names. As far as our senior class, again, that's going to be another small group. I mean, this is all part of what we've been rebuilding. So that group was a group that I inherited. So they were sophomores my first year. We have Lucas Stuckert, who's going to be returning defensive lineman for us. Vince Curio is a returning wide receiver for us. Gavin Fitzgerald is a returning wide receiver. Gavin's another kid. He's been starting since his sophomore year, so this will be his 3rd year starting on varsity football. Leo Soriano's a returning starting defensive back that he also has been starting since his sophomore year as well. Max Pittage is a defensive back. It's going to be a senior returning starter. So we, although lost a lot of talent, I mean, we have been building for a few years now and really just hoping that we could stay healthy and start to compete a little bit better in this great conference.
Well, that's great. It sounds like there's a lot of kids who played a lot of football. That's a big deal in this conference, as you mentioned. One of the things you mentioned this conference, and I always want to point out when schools keep rivalries alive. One of the worries with kind of how the conference is set up as far as the divisions within the conference changing year by year is lost rivalries. You open with Notre Dame this year. It's one of the greatest rivalries in the conference, if not the state. What makes it so special?
Yeah, I'm very lucky because I grew up on the south side and I grew up in the St. Rita community. So I was always a part of the St. Rita Mount Carmel rivalry. And I remember being a young kid, I grew up on 63rd Street, and that's back when St. Rita was on 63rd and Western. And we would go down 63rd Street. My dad would get me Dunkin' Donuts, which was like a huge treat to me, and we'd go watch St. Rita Mount Carmel. And then I also got to coach in that rivalry as well. In high school, I ended up moving to the north side, and that's how I ended up going to St. Pat's. So I'm one of the few South Siders with a St. Pat's diploma. But anyway, then I got to be a part of the St. Pat's Notre Dame rivalry, which is great. Now, when I was at St. Pat's, our rivals were, Notre Dame was not our number one rival. It was Weber for sure.
Okay.
Which unfortunately is closed. And then the second was Holy Cross. Like those were the 2 really big games. Unfortunately, both those schools do not exist anymore. So I just think by default, the Notre Dame St. Pat's rivalry has just exploded. So I could tell you it's a really special game in any sport. To be a part of it. Like again, to grow up with that St. Rita Mount Carmel rivalry and now morph into my professional career to be a part of the St. Pat's Notre Dame rivalry is really special. I mean, it's really cool. So like we're talking about summer, I tell my players, like, these are the games that it makes it all worthwhile. Like, yes, it's hard to keep coming to practice in the heat. You feel like you have nothing to practice for, but you do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're opening up with your rival, Now the negative side of that to both the Rita Mount Carmel, St. Pat's, Notre Dame thing is like getting on from it, right? I mean, there's just like this, like if you win it, you didn't win anything. And if you lose, you didn't lose anything. Like getting people to just calm down after that is always the tough part, because you win, people act like, oh my God, we won the state championship. Or if you lose, oh, the season's over. It's like, look, it's a great game. It's a special environment. Both student sections will represent both alums. It matters a lot. And, after the game at the watering holes, because pretty much everyone at St. Pat's, everyone's from St. Pat's and from Notre Dame are either coppers or firemen and, some type of union laborers. They all end up at the watering holes after the game and buy each other drinks and losers buy and all that type of stuff, right? So it's a lot of fun. But either way, we just got to wake up the next day and move on, because this conference, there is no time to take a breath.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great perspective that you offer. Sometimes it's difficult to get young players and high school age players to move on. And they have to understand it's one game. Well, that is a really interesting perspective. But, I typically do this interview and this podcast with my brother Joe, my co-host. So I stole a question that he likes to ask. So if we're doing this interview next year, what do you hope we'll be talking about regarding your football team?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, he's smarter than
really,
me. So
yeah. So really, what I'm hoping that we're talking about is that all those young kids that I talked about that are now going into their junior year, some of those kids going into their senior year. I mean, we have many 3-year starters returning. I'm hoping that we're talking about the fact that we really saw the payoff of sacrificing playing younger players all those years. The other thing I hope we're talking about are some kids that just completely embraced the process, that maybe they were on the freshman B team. Maybe they didn't play a lot as sophomores, whatever it may be, but they embraced the process and just kind of came out of nowhere as a dark horse and up being a huge contributor to our team. Like, those are really exciting stories to be able to tell, hopefully next year.
Excellent. Well, I mentioned my co-host, Joe. We were actually talking about this interview with you. We were going to introduce a new segment that we're going to do on and off. So we've both been in this a long time, and we know a lot of people. And then your story about being on the south side and coming to the north side, I'm sure you know a ton of people. But when we were first discussing the podcast, your name was so familiar to me, but I knew we hadn't met. And so I said, there's got to be some way that Coach Mertens and I know one another. And, I thought, well, so I said, it's like the 6 degrees of separation, right? And so my brother said, hey, let's do something called the 6 degrees of Frevaletti, like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, And so we thought we were going to have questions, and I said, why don't I do Coach Mertens? But I was stacking the deck. So because I know how we have a connection, and so I'm gonna mention that. And when I played at Northwestern, our graduate assistant was Coach Galante, Dan Galante, and I know I saw that he's back with the program. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, excellent. So there's always, it didn't take long, and had Joe been here, I would have won this round. But Coach Galante was a great guy. He was one of those guys that was just removed from kind of college himself. So he was a guy that was almost like a friend, another friend rather than a coach. Great guy. We loved having him. Please tell him that I said hello. And Coach, I really, really appreciate your time today and for being on Varsity Voice. How is Coach Galante doing, by the way?
Yeah, Coach Galante, man. I mean, you want to talk about just one of the great leaders of men, and you want to talk about a career of servant leadership.
Yes.
I mean, his entire career, like you mentioned, he was a GA at Northwestern. He coached Division III football for a long time. Right. He was a 16-year head coach at St. Pat's, and really those were some of the best years Probably the Coach Urban years in the mid 80s to early 90s were great. Coach Galante's years in the 2000s. I mean, those were like highlights of the St. Pat's football, history. He did such an awesome job with that. I should mention the 60s were amazing as well. My dad played at St. Pat's in the 60s. They were a big deal back then. So
yeah.
those alums would be really mad at me for not mentioning it. But anyway,
Good.
Coach
Good
gave
work.
all those years to St. Pat's, and to have him back, I mean, he literally has given his life to Division III football and to Catholic schools. So just a great man who truly cares about kids. He absolutely loves St. Patrick High School. He loves our students, and honestly, he's such a motivation to me. I want to win so badly for him. I mean, we have him. We have Coach Lucas is one of my assistants as well. Coach Luke was my freshman coach at St. Pat's, and anyone who's gone to St. Pat's knows Coach Lucas. He graduated St. Pat's in 1981. He's been coaching there for 36 years. I mean, these are two guys that I want to win for them because I know how much it'll mean for them for St. Pat's to be a winner, and that's what really keeps me going. So Coach Galante is doing well. He's still just a magnet for kids. Our kids still love him. And we are so blessed to have him, not just from a football knowledge, but just from a human being knowledge and what he does for the betterment of our boys and our school as a whole. I could use a whole staff of Coach Galante for sure.
That's excellent. Well, like I said, please tell him I said hello, give him my best. Coach, thank you so much for joining us today on the Varsity Voices from the coach's office. Best of luck this season, and we will talk to you soon.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on, and thanks for promoting our great league. I appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, so that was Coach Mertens from St. Pat's, and my co-host Dan Frevaletti with another great interview with one of the head coaches in the Chicago Catholic League. I do have to say my favorite part of that interview is when Dan said that I'm smarter than he is. So I'm sure he'll be listening and he'll love that. But anyways, Coach Mertens, very introspective and insightful. If you're a avid listener to our other podcasts, I think every coach that we've interviewed so far and talked to has mentioned the challenge, I'll call it a challenge of, I think Coach Mertens said fighting for athletes, right? Football always seems to be struggling these days because of, it might be baseball, it might be lacrosse, it might be AAU basketball. I think those are just some of the ones that were mentioned, but it's a different animal than it was, 10, 20 years ago. And, one of the things I like is that the coaches recognize it and they're trying to address it and, incorporate it into what they do and how they go about building their program. So I did like the mention of spring ball. So that's interesting to me. I had not heard that before from anybody else, any other coaches. So I wonder if there's some type of groundswell of support for something like that going forward with other coaches throughout the state. Like I said, I have not heard that before, so I'd be interested to see if that's something that there seems to be some support for. So, everything that I feel like everything that the college programs do, and they morph over from year to year, and they grow from year to year, and they change things from year to year. I always feel like it takes a little bit of time, but eventually those kind of things push down to the high school level. So maybe something like spring ball will take hold with others within Illinois who are head coaches of football teams. The other thing that I wrote down through that interview is Coach Mertens is in, what he admits is kind of a rebuild, right? And at the upper grades or senior level, their numbers were down, but over the last 3 years since he's been there, he's been playing freshmen, sophomores. He's going to have seniors this year who've been 3-year starters on the varsity. So even though they had a down year last year, I think that probably bodes well for kind of a turnaround or a better season this year. Now, obviously, and he mentions this, is the Chicago Catholic League is a great league, right? And very competitive, and every game is extremely tough. It's a grinder of a conference, as we mentioned before, but I think it sounds like he's put himself in a pretty good spot as far as grooming some players over the years, knowing that he's going to have to take some lumps in some years, and hopefully that comes to fruition this year for him. So, anyways, another great interview with a head coach from the Chicago Catholic League, and we'll have more of those coming up in some of our next episodes. So make sure you listen in. That's it for this special episode of From the Coach's Office. Thanks for listening again. Make sure you tune in for our next episode, where we will bring you another preseason edition of From the Coach's Office. We're in the preseason here. We're getting through all of these coaches' interviews, and I think it's interesting to hear where they're at now and what they're doing to kind of prepare for the upcoming season. So we'll keep bringing those to you over the next several weeks. Make sure you subscribe, follow, or like us on wherever you're listening from. Don't forget, we're on X at @varsity_voices1, Instagram at @the_varsity_voices, Facebook at the Varsity Voices Chicago Catholic League Football, as well as YouTube. You can also leave any comments on where you're listening from. Be happy to get those and hear those and actually respond to those in a future podcast. If you want to leave a comment, you can also email us at varsityvoices312@gmail.com. Make sure you come back and tune in for our next episode. Thank you.